Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good
How we
morning.
doing? Ready to begin?
Does the Rebbe have um, a replacement?
Does the Rebbe have a replacement?
Yes,
Good question.
in Lubavitch
No.
circles,
No.
no replacement. So do people feel the lack of that, or the Rebbe's emanations are so strong that they still um, occupy that place of Rebbehood?
Yeah, I guess you have to. So the question is, do people feel the Rebbe's absence, or do people feel the lack of a Rebbe, or
Rebbe
is his presence still?
enough.
Yeah.
I mean, like, his words are preserved in books, and his talks are probably
Yeah.
still preserved on tapes.
Yes, that's true. It's a tough question because
Probably yes and no.
yeah, yes and no, and why. So I guess I could approach the question in three ways. Okay. First question is, in every generation of on the one hand, in Hasidic circles, in every generation, a Rebbe was automatically, if not immediately, but very shortly replaced. And in most circles, that's still the case. On the other hand, to those who say, well, they should do the same, I would say, well, in the mainstream Jewish world, there's no such thing as a Rebbe in the first place. So all of a sudden, I find it ironic when non-Hasidim come to a Chassid with an expectation, saying, "Well, where's your Rebbe? Where's your Rebbe?" You know what I mean? You're doing. You seem to think you're doing fine, so why can't I be doing fine? But at the same time, the as I said before, on the other hand, on the first hand, that is, clearly in the Hasidic movement has historically been centered around the Rebbe. And so the question is, if a Rebbe is needed, if no Rebbe is needed, why did they always do it? And if no Rebbe is needed, if a Rebbe is needed, then why isn't there one now? So that's the three. That's two of the three ways, I guess, questions to answer about that. Well, that's all three then, yeah, right? Number one is, why was it there ever? Number two is, if it wasn't, or where is it because it's needed, or what changed?
What changed that no one has been
That no one has been elected, yeah. So, logistically speaking, there are two things that have changed. One is maybe changed, but we've reached a new stage. One is, logistically speaking, the ability to preserve a person's message today is much more possible than it ever was, right? So not only is the proliferation of word and print beyond what it's ever been in history, but the Rebbe came up in the audio and visual world. The print world was already mature at that point, and matured exponentially during that point. But the audio visual world had just come up. The Rebbe is the first television Rebbe. Similar to the way lahavdil that Kennedy was the first television president. And ever since then, it's been a new, it's been exponentially developing how much a person's image is present in the homes of the individual people. So that's one thing that changed, logistical change. At the same time, the stated this is the difference between the mission of Chabad, and it may explain somewhat why it hasn't why Chabad has distinguished itself, both in the sense that it had a Rebbe when mainstream Judaism did not, and in the sense that now that it does not, even though in the Hasidic world they do. Okay, so what's unique about Chabad is the particular purpose that the Rebbe had and the mission, that the stated mission of the Rebbe. Okay, so in general in the Hasidic world, the purpose of the Rebbe is to inspire his Hasidim. So the end user, the recipient of the Rebbe's position in the world, will be the followers of the Rebbe. Okay, in Chabad thinking, the end user of the Rebbe is not the Chassid. And this is more so this has been the stated mission of the Chabad Rebbes, at least as characterized by the Rebbe from the beginning of the Chabad movement. But his teaching is the world, so that the Rebbe's purpose is not to be a spiritual leader to his congregation or community, but to change the world. And to change the world, you don't need followers. You need to delegate. You need to create leaders. And that's really what the Rebbe did. And so from day one, his teaching wasn't listen to what I'm saying. His teaching was, this is what you need to be saying. This is who you are. His very first teaching was, every one of us needs to be a teacher. We all need to change the world. We all need to bring Hashem's presence down here on earth. And we may think that we're unworthy or unfit or not qualified to engage in that kind of world-changing behavior. But he said, everyone knows something. And if all you know is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, if all you know is Aleph, Aleph, teach Aleph and share that with those around you. And so that really characterized the Rebbe's whole philosophy, and the Rebbe's whole leadership was all about, Judaism is not about the Jew. And it's really more, it's not only about Chabad, it's really a philosophy of faith, it's a philosophy of what we're doing here on earth. That Judaism is not about the Jew. Judaism is a gift to the world that Jews are the stewards of. So we are the stewards of that gift, and we have a calling to go and bring that gift to the world. Yeah? And so therefore, the mission doesn't die when the Rebbe dies. Meaning, if he was successful, then when the Rebbe dies, when the Rebbe passes, Chassidim would never let the word "the Rebbe died" come past their lips. So I've committed some blasphemy there. After the Rebbe's life here on earth, that is the test of whether he accomplished what he set out to accomplish. And so in a sense, and this is a kind of a problem, that the Hasidic movement always appears to be, and in Chabad too, appeared to be a movement centered around the Rebbe, right? When I'm saying that in reality, it was a movement centered around the universe. So the Rebbe is at the back, and the Hasidim are closer to the world. and those that the Hasidim touch are even closer, right? Until we reach this kind of pyramid effect, right? But for somebody who's in the old school way, it seems like it's a movement centered around the Rebbe, and so, in a sense, the biggest vulnerability of the Rebbe's mission is the Rebbe himself. For the yeah, right. So that Hasidim are sort of supposed to be going to the Rebbe, when in fact they're supposed to be coming from the Rebbe and going to the world. And so in a sense, so that's what I think about this. That the fact that there's no Rebbe is a sign of, in a sense, the Rebbe's success. And this is actually where the tires hit the dirt, in the sense that no longer is the Rebbe's personage a distraction, and we're kind of left to sink or swim, or as my mother once said, to jump and learn that we fly. And that's it's painful, right? But that's where I think where the rubber meets the road, in that we realize what we find ourselves now doing what we were expected to do, which is to stop thinking about the Rebbe and think about what the Rebbe taught us. And yeah, so that's does that answer your question?
Sort of.
Yeah, why?
It mollifies me. But I would think that there's room. I mean, if I was giving a talk, since I'm supposed to teach my Aleph, I would say there's room for veneration. So it's fine that you venerate the Rebbe. It's fine to have Rebbes. Don't forget this other thing, which is a message of the Rebbe to change the world.
Yeah.
It's very good, but we don't have to throw away the other one.
Right. So I certainly think that that's what Hasidim would have said during the Rebbe's lifetime. Meaning, I don't think anyone would have disagreed with what I'm saying while the Rebbe was alive.
Right.
And they would have said, yes, absolutely. And we wish that the Rebbe would live forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they would literally say that. I wish the Rebbe would live forever. And no one, and I remember this, nobody lived in Chabad. The normal Chassid didn't live with any expectation at all, any consideration at all of the inevitability of the Rebbe's passing. It was a non-issue. It was not considered at all. I mean, I'm sure that there were some senior people, whatever, but the followers of the Rebbe, that wasn't part of the plan.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are some people now walking around saying, probably there's a different division in the Chabad community, I guess, yeah. Right? But some say the Rebbe was the Mashiach.
Right.
Why do I bring that up? And some.
And others say that he's still alive.
Okay.
Yeah. They still consider him alive. So, well, so let's say like this. In order to say, is the Rebbe Mashiach, what do people mean when they say the Rebbe is Mashiach? I think that a lot of clarity is required on what the word Mashiach means, right? And it's a relevant, it's the crux of the issue, right? And I think that in the lay world, let's call it, we may not be talking about the same thing.
Uh,
You know, we may be talking around the same thing, but we may be looking at it from two opposite directions. And the same, and ultimately, you know, it lends itself to that kind of subjectivity, meaning where there isn't, where we're not all pointing to a manifest reality. You know, when we're talking about something that hasn't happened yet, let's say, then it's what we mean when we say it's going to happen or he is that person is subjective, right? If we're talking about, let's say, war, right? So we all know what war looks like, right? So we can have different opinions about war. It exists on a spectrum, right? But ultimately, there are clear, defined things that we can all point to and say that's it. And the same goes for peace. Talk about peace. We know what peace is, right? And so we can say, is this war? Is this peace? And we can have. We don't have to fight so hard to define our terms because the terms are pretty objectively available. Whereas when we talk about something like Mashiach that has not ever happened yet, we have to fight harder. We have to work harder to clarify our terms. So that's what I would say, first of all. And certainly, in the more and therefore, the more religious a person is, the more likely they are to have a clear opinion about what Mashiach means, and therefore, the more careful we have to be about clarifying, not relying on the symbol, on the cliche, and to speak about it without using the word. You know what I mean? So that we don't fall into the trap of talking about different things using the same name. So talking about the Rebbe as having been Mashiach, as having been the Mashiach, look, we have to first ask the question: can someone have been the Mashiach? Is that possible to have been the Mashiach? Judaism doesn't believe in a Mashiach in past tense. We believe in Mashiach in the future tense. So what is Mashiach then? So if we say Mashiach is there are the times of Mashiach and there is the person Mashiach, right? And they're inseparable. That is, or they're interchangeable, I should say, in that there is a state of world, a manner of being, a way of operating in the world, a way that the world operates, a new world order, let's say. And then Mashiach is the leader of the driver of that movement, the leader of that movement, and which is interchangeable with the King of the Jews, right? So if the Jewish people, go again. So the time of Mashiach is a way in which the world operates, right? A new world order, and the person driving that new world order is the person Mashiach. And if the Jewish people, if we think about it again in the pyramid sense, that there is one person starting the movement, then there are the key early adopters or lieutenants of that movement, and then there is the recipients of that movement, or the end user, the goal of that movement, the end goal of that movement, right? So if you believe that the Jewish people are the lieutenants of that movement, then the person behind, then Mashiach will be the King of the Jews. But again, Mashiach is not for the Jews in Chabad theology. Mashiach is not so that it should be good for the Jews. Mashiach is to create a new world order, which would be manifest in every facet of life in the cosmos. So what is the new world order? It is a world that no longer lives in conflict with God. Or again, to avoid a buzzword, a world that no longer lives in conflict with its purpose. Yeah. So a world in which currently the world, goodness is concealed in the world. There is conflict in the world. There are goodness is imprisoned, to use a Kabbalistic terminology. Light is frustrated, right? And Mashiach is when all of the world reaches its actualization in a positive sense. Okay, so that was the purpose of the Torah from the outset. The purpose of the Torah is that light, right? The Torah is, at least for the Jewish people, is that light. Historically, the Jewish people have been restricted and frustrated in even practicing that light on their own, but and therefore it was unthinkable. Sort of the Isaiah prophecy, the prophetic idea that from Zion shall go forth the Torah, that from Zion, from the Jewish people, shall go forth the Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. Not that the Torah goes to Jerusalem, and that the Jewish people are that the Torah is about Jewish people going to Jerusalem, but that Jerusalem is the center of Zion, of the Jewish people, and the Torah should go forth from there to the world, and the Jewish people should be a light of nations. This was inconceivable as long as the Jewish people were frustrated, restricted, and oppressed. Right? But nonetheless, all this time, the Jewish people's being a suffering servant, the Jewish people being a frustrated and withheld, was a symptom of the state of the world as it is, which is an old world order, an exile order, a conflicted world, a world in which there is a force that opposes the destiny, the world reaching its destiny and reaching its self-actualization, right? And that sums up the whole picture, right? So now, again, so if you notice, I said two stories that were parallel to the other. Right? You asked me before, where is the Rebbe now? Right? So I said that Chabad teaching was never about the students of the Rebbe. It was always about changing the world, right? And I'm saying the same thing in a sense about the Torah. And listen, I was raised in Chabad, so I view the Torah through the teachings of Chabad. And it's not the idea. And again, if you realize Chabad is not an exclusive movement, because the point is that there isn't this idea of a Chabad community that's supposed to be, whose lines are supposed to be maintained, whose borders are supposed to be maintained. The Chabad teaching is that Judaism is meant to change the world, and I think that any traditional Jew would be hard pressed to disagree with it. Question is how to implement it. Okay, so again, just like Moses was not for the Jews. Moses was for the world, but through the Jews, because from Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. However, Moses wasn't the Mashiach, because in Moses' time, I would say that it was still conceivable that the Jewish people would be frustrated and oppressed. Right? Now, in Moses' time himself, the Jewish people were ascending, right? But in retrospect, he wasn't Mashiach because we weren't manifesting that destiny of bringing our teaching to the world. Yeah? So what am I saying? I'm saying that the Rebbe represented that idea of dedicating himself in a real way to changing the world. And that is a Messianic idea. And so therefore it's quite understandable that his Hasidim would feel that he was, I'm not going to say was the Mashiach, because that lends itself to misunderstanding. I'm going to say his Hasidim felt that he was manifesting a world-changing destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And that destiny is clearly continuing. That hasn't stopped. And that's why, that work isn't over. We haven't given up our hope on it happening. And for the people who are doing that, who are engaged in that manifesting of the world-changing destiny, and are doing so with the inspiration and teaching of the Rebbe, some of them would say the Rebbe was manifesting a messianic destiny or a world-changing destiny, and others would say the Rebbe still is manifesting that world-changing destiny because the movement is still being driven by his teaching. And others would say it's not about the Rebbe, it's about the destiny, but they're all saying the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, the world looks like it's in a sorry state. We see a lot of problems in the world. We have not reached the messianic vision.
Right.
That's pretty clear.
Well, I wouldn't say it's pretty clear. I would say, first of all, what is the messianic vision? Right.
People not killing each other.
So,
Starvation.
I'll say this.
Religions not accusing each other of being the wrong religion.
Okay, let's say this. So you say, what is Messianic thing? Messianic is peace and plenty and harmony, right? When a child thinks about what is going to be a good adulthood, what does it mean to live a good life? They'll think, I'm going to have a nice house. I'm going to have everything I want. Enough toys, essentially, and less, and no pain, right? Then that child, but what in reality happens is that first we go through adolescence, in which we define who is going to be the driver of that success. What is going to be the key to my success? That's essentially what happens in adolescence. Yeah? We find ourselves. And ourselves is what we will actualize. When we actualize ourselves successfully without restriction, we'll be able to achieve success, right? So adolescence is a very awkward and painful time. That process of finding myself is very frustrating. Then, after we reach adulthood, once we reach adulthood, there are many ducks to be lined up in reaching that success. And often, what seems like failure is a step toward, meaning I'll give. I'm thinking if I could think of a concrete example quickly. Um, when a person, let's say a person wants to be a good doctor, okay? Let's say a good psychologist. Person wants to be a good psychologist. So until that person has experienced real pain in their life, they can't possibly be an effective psychologist because they won't know what they're treating. And it's not like, it's not like a mechanic where you can see somebody else's problem and tweak it. The only way to understand human pain is to experience human pain. So now, this child wanted to be rich, wanted to have, they don't want to be rich. What they want is to not experience pain, right? In order to do that, they're going to have to be rich. In order to be rich, they're going to have to be successful at being themselves. What is me? I'm a psychologist. Now, the moment before I become a successful psychologist, I'm going to experience the biggest pain of my life. I will never be. So you might say, well, here you were trying to get success, and now you just experienced this terrible disaster in your life, and you're more broken up than you've ever been in your entire life. And you're telling me that now you're closer than you've ever been to being successful? And the answer is yes, if you know what the goal is. And the reality is that in life's journey, because it's a journey, if I would know it, I would be it, and therefore we never know it until we get there, and therefore suffering and pain feels like suffering and pain because we don't see it in hindsight. We only see it from our own perspective. Yeah. So therefore, when you talk about the world being a dark place, that's true, but it's also possible that we're closer than we've ever been. Okay, so I will talk about specifics then. So first of all, so there's two ways to address this. Number one, we can look at what's good despite what's bad. That's easy. And then we can look at what's bad and see how it might be bringing us toward our actualization. Okay. So what's good? The easy stuff, medicine. The ease of moving through the world, right? This is the child's version of what actualization looks like. Reducing pain, right? Making life more comfortable. We have never been as healthy as we are today, and the end of most major illnesses is in sight. Meaning we have just think about what happened in stem cell research in the last 10 years, 15 years. You remember the stem cell research controversy? Embryonic stem cells. You remember embryonic stem cells? It doesn't exist anymore. Why don't we hear about embryonic stem cell research anymore? So it used to be that embryonic stem cell research was magic, was amazing, and so much so that people were willing to cross ethical lines in order to get there. But today we're not discussing it because we've moved beyond it.
How come we have a source of stem cells that are not ethically questionable?
Yes. We found a way to identify those same stem cells in a person using their own stem cells. Yeah. So that's a phenomenal development. Genetic, we're personalized medicine based on an individual DNA is now something that's being discussed in a real way. Growing your own limbs, regenerating the body is. So this is like We are in a brave new world as far as medicine is concerned. We can do amazing things. I mean, just think about even the last 100 years. I mean, a heart transplant. Can you imagine? So we take these things for granted, right? Plenty. So talk about famine, yeah? You can buy a nectarine in the winter in the United States. That's unheard of. Right? Nobody needs to be. There is enough food to feed the entire world today. There is. We have genetically modified organisms. The ability of a field to produce is exponentially greater than it's ever been in history. Meaning that we're able to do. So you can argue about the whether it's right to have genetically modified organisms or not, but nonetheless, we may not be there yet, but we are further than we've ever been, and in an exponentially greater way. Greenhouses. I mean, there are ways of growing things that were just unheard, that were never thought of in the past. But that's still early. Meaning, and I mentioned this before. More than no, Steven Pinker. Yeah, what about it?
He has a book.
I love Steven Pinker.
That would be much better off now if you take these measurements.
Yeah.
The number of killings and wars.
Right. War is down in an incredible way. Yeah. Yeah, and yet we're more anxious than we've ever been. But that's the next. That's I'm getting there. But in a short answer, the reason why we're more anxious than we've ever been is because we're experiencing as a society post-adolescence, early adulthood, and we're going through the societal angst of self-realization. As a society, we're going through a self-realization, and that comes with angst, and we're reflecting on our inherited pain as a society, which is what we do in our early adulthood. So that's the short answer. When we talk about so then what else is amazing about today? Communication, right? Today, not only can we communicate, not only do we have instantaneous communication across the world in a way that's brand new, meaning in the last 5 years, in the last 5 to 7 years, we have the ability to video chat with anyone in the world for free. So not only do we do that, but also the world's information. We have access to information and the ability to aggregate that information and to search through that information instantaneously. But in a new development, language is also no longer a barrier, because you can open a web page in any language and have it automatically translated to your own language. And so the bringing together of the world, the blurring of the boundaries that divided us, is now available. And this is part of the Messianic prophecy, which is that the world, that all the nations of the world will serve God with one consent. And that means that the world unites, and this is finally possible. It's meaning the path, there's a path forward to do this. And then the last point, which I think, going back to the societal angst, in order for war to really be eradicated, remember, we have to think about the world not in the top-down approach, in the Rebbe-centered approach, in the in the monarchy-centered approach, which all of these, by the way, are basically obsolete. The monarchy, even the Rebbe, meaning for all of the Hasidic movements that are out there with Rebbes, there are no Rebbes anymore. There's nobody that we can point to today who is on the stature of the Rebbes of 50 years ago. And this is, I think that it's not only because everything gets, the older I get, the better it used to be, right? This is not a nostalgia. It's just there isn't. And the same is in every, presidents aren't what they used to be. Not only because of their character, but because the relationship of society to its leaders isn't what it used to be. We don't have the veneration of a leader that we used to have, right? And that's because we're moving away from this top-down approach now, meaning daddy is no longer here. It's up to us. So going back to, if we're going to really eradicate war in a meaningful and effective way, it's not going to be because dictators don't allow it anymore, because we have benevolent monarchs. It's going to be because individual people are healthy, are emotionally healthy, and don't fight with each other anymore. Right? Society is made up of people, and each of those people have to be spiritually, emotionally well. So this is why I brought the example of a psychologist before, right? Because to eradicate war, the individual people have to be well. And this requires, this is why I think, the psychotherapy is, I think, a big part of the New World Order, where we're trying to fix people from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And that means that we're going to experience anxiety. We're going to start feeling stuff that we have never felt in history. I mean, it could be that people felt this in history, but on a societal level, we see an emotional angst and dysfunction that we haven't seen described in the past. And that's because we're ready to fix it. So yes, the world is still a dark place, but the keys, we are now facing a Messianic turnkey operation. And not only that, but the specific dysfunction of society today is part of the process to realize and actualize that New World Order. And I want to point to one more example, and that is the one that you mentioned about the conflict between different faith communities. So we live in a world right now. There's an unhealthy confluence of the availability of information and open communication and different ideas. So it used to be that you could live to a certain degree in a bubble, and the truth is we are kind of maintaining that status quo with the nature of social media and search algorithms that allow people to live in a bubble. But nonetheless, it used to be possible to live in a community and never meet somebody who thinks differently than you. Right? Think back to, I hear from people who grew up on the Lower East Side. Where did you grow up?
In the Bronx.
You grew up in the Bronx. A person grew up in the Bronx, he only knew Jews, right? And maybe a couple of Italians, right? Everyone spoke Yiddish. That's just how it was, right? A person could think that the whole world was Jewish, right? That's the world that we lived in. And so religious conflict only exists on the fringes, right? It only exists in the awkward meeting places where the two worlds clash, but there are two distinct worlds. Today, those lines are blurred. And therefore, we'd see a lot more conflict between faith communities because there's a lot more communication. And at the same time, so you have the toxic manifestation of that, you have the naive manifestation of that, right? You have the people who are all rosy, airy-fairy, interfaith, let's all kumbaya, get along, and it's all good. And they risk, in many cases, watering down their own identity and belief in the interest of universality. You have others who are hardline, my way is right and your way is wrong, and we are having to confront this clash of ideas in a new way that we haven't had to clash ever in history. Maybe not since the three sons of Noah all lived under one roof.
I grew up in a world that was more mixed.
Huh?
I grew up in a world that was more mixed. I grew up in National Capital.
Yeah.
And the community was part Jewish but not Orthodox, and part Italian, and part a whole bunch of other things.
What party did they vote for?
Democrat.
All Democrats.
Not all.
Give me the breakdown. 50-50, 60-40, 80-20.
Well, I know Suffolk County was mainly Republican.
Nassau County.
Nassau County was mainly Democrat.
How many black people lived in your neighborhood? How many black people did you know growing up?
Just my cleaning woman.
Right.
But there were a lot of Italians. There were a lot of...
Yeah, but you were all basically the same.
No.
Well, what did you have in common? You all went to church on Sunday or Shabbos.
No, not everybody went to...
Give me the breakdown. 60-40, 80-20, 50-50.
Probably 50-50.
50-50? Really?
Yeah. Not everybody went to church, synagogue, anything.
No?
Our schools were all merged. Everybody had schooling together, and
give me an example of the most diverse thing you experienced in your youth.
The most diverse thing.
Yeah.
I guess it was school where everybody.
So give me an example of when that moment, or give me an example of a moment of diversity. I mean, you already grew up in a world where schools were integrated, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Schools were totally integrated.
How many black kids were in your class? None. You said you only knew your cleaning lady, so that means there were no black kids in your class.
In my area, there were no black people,
right?
But we, but I guess because we were more in the outside world, and
how many black people did you see on television? Well, I guess you grew up in what, in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
50s and 60s.
Late 50s,
late 50s, early
70s.
60s. So in the late 50s, early 60s, how many black people did you see on television? Very few.
Cosby.
All right, 80-20.
Yeah.
90-10.
90-10.
Right? Then later. So I'm just saying that the degree of what you're calling diversity in Nassau County, today we live in a completely in a exponentially more diverse world. The clash of ideas, and again, the world has been moving in this direction, right? And America has been at the forefront of that movement in many ways. There's a uniquely American, right? Every community has its own part in moving toward that direction. America has had its part to play in moving the world forward in that direction, right? And it could very well be said that the East Coast, that the coasts have been, leading that on the how do you call it, on the vanguard of those changes. And it could very well be that Nassau County was at the was one of the one of those areas that are more progressed, one of those outposts. But I would still submit that even Nassau County even Nassau County of the 1960s was behind when you could think of all the things that were taboo and unheard of and unknown, not discussed, right?
No, all I was
You never knew a Muslim
saying-
growing up.
Never what?
You never knew a Muslim growing up,
No.
right?
Uh,
And today I have, and I didn't know a Muslim growing up either, right? And today I've been invited. I've been invited to a mosque. You know, that was.
All I was really saying was I did not grow up in a community that was only Jewish.
Right. So I'm saying this is not only about Jewish, right? I hear you. But my point is that this is not only about Jews, meaning even in the Bronx, it wasn't only Jewish, but nonetheless, there was a homogeneity, homogeneity. There was a sameness to the community, and there were other communities that looked very different. And there was and the people who lived in this community, you didn't even know about the other people in the different community. Right. So what's the point that I'm getting at? I'm saying that we're coming together in a way that we haven't come together ever in history. That's resulting in a lot of conflicts that we haven't had to deal with ever in history. It's resulting in but that conflict itself, another 5 minutes. That conflict itself is a sign of progress and not a sign of, it's a sign of how, right. Yeah, hopefully. Listen, it's that, like I said, that it's work in order to reach emotional and mental health, you have to clean out some pretty dirty closets. And we're headed. I believe that we're headed on that path. Great. Yeah. So I'm being invited to call it quits now. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
Okay. So to those who say that the Rebbe was Mashiach, I say, wouldn't that be nice? But I think that it's coming. I see that I think that we have to remember to every so often stop and realize what a different world we live in today. That's different, more different than any world has ever been different from the world before it. You know what I mean? Like we've always been, the generations have always been different from the generation before, but I think we're more different than we've ever been.